Welcome to the Airline Weekly Lounge. I'm your host, Edward Russell, and I'm joined by my co-host, Jay Shabat, to discuss earnings at JetBlue, Air France-KLM, and IAG, and their outlooks. Enjoy. Hey, Jay, how's your week going?
Oh, all good, Ned. How about you?
Going well. We're still in the thick of earnings here. We're recording this on Wednesday, August 2nd, and this week alone we have JetBlue, Frontier, Spirit, Lufthansa, Allegiant. So the list goes on and on.
Japan Airlines, Indigo, list goes on and
That's
on.
absolutely. But today we're going to talk about three airlines. We'll talk about JetBlue before the break, and then afterwards we'll talk a little bit about Europe and look at IAG and Air France-KLM's results. But Jay, tell us, how did JetBlue do in the second quarter?
Okay, so as usual, we'll start with some numbers, some of the headline numbers from the second quarter. So JetBlue did not do particularly well in relative terms relative to its peers, its US peers. So operating margin came in at 9.9%, call it 10%. I just wanted to take a second. I did get a couple of emails asking, from some people who may be new to the industry or in different parts of the industry where you're not dealing with these financial numbers so much. I just wanted to quickly mention that when I talk about operating results, when Ned and I, use that phrase, well, we're really good. All we're doing is we're going to the income statement that airlines will file typically every quarter. And income statement is just a synonym for profit and loss statement. And they'll have a revenue number and they'll have an operating profit number, which excludes costs related to interest on debt and taxes, but all the other costs pretty much dumped into that. And then we just divide that operating profit divided by revenues, and that's what that operating margin is. And if anybody has any questions, just feel free to email us or give us a call. We're happy to walk it through with you. So, okay, 10% for JetBlue. You can compare it to Alaska if you want, which is 18%, so almost double. And JetBlue, Ned, you can talk about maybe some of the highlights of their call. I'll just say this: every time I listen to a JetBlue call, I think they might as well just make a recording every quarter and just say something like, the Northeast was more difficult operationally than we expected. It was we had to cancel more flights, we had to delay more flights, but don't worry, it'll get better in the future. And that's the reason for our disappointing results. That seems like the recurring theme of every JetBlue call.
Just put it on repeat. I mean, it's true.
Put on repeat.
Yeah, they warned in April that about potential air traffic control impacts in New York, and we were a little skeptical, and they played out. And the truth is JetBlue could, because so much of their capacity is in New York and Boston. I think they said around 50% or something. They have a much higher impact from weather, air traffic control delays, all those things at JFK than United Airlines, which actually got a lot more press about their disruptions at Newark than JetBlue did, even though it arguably is a much bigger impact on JetBlue's broader system. But that played out in June and July, and they expect it to continue in August, and that is hurting their results, like you said, Jay. They definitely highlighted that in their call. But the thing that really hit me and the thing I was listening for was the impact from ending the Northeast Alliance with American Airlines. JetBlue and American lost their case against the DOJ in May and were forced to unwind it. And JetBlue decided not to appeal and to unwind that last month in July. And so really, this call is the first time we've seen the cost of that, and it's going to be a big one. So JetBlue hasn't put exact revenue numbers to what the Northeast Alliance brought them in or what it cost them, but they did give an earnings per share impact. And Jay, you've told me how we can't read too much into exactly what that is in terms of profit, but earnings per share impact will be about a fifth of their full year outlook. Now, of course, that number can be fudged by buying back shares or doing something else. But I mean, a cut by their full year outlook by a fifth is not insignificant, by at least a fifth, I should say. So it's a big cost for JetBlue, and it's really, they might lose money in the third quarter, which is pretty impressive considering that is a peak summer travel season.
Yeah, did they actually say they might lose money in the third quarter?
Yes,
I
yes. I mean, their guidance is down to flat. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's they definitely have a lot of issues. I mean, you mentioned the Northeast Alliance and these air traffic control. We joke about it, but it's something that always comes up in their calls. But this operational distress in markets like New York and Boston, that's serious, and it's getting worse. I mean, weather patterns are getting worse, weather disruptions are getting worse, and air traffic control shortages are worse than they ever were. And I think that's one of the reasons why JetBlue just feels like it has to do something radical, and hence the Spirit merger,
Yep.
which will that's I think that's one reason why they feel they have to do something like that, and that would, if approved, the Spirit merger would in fact diversify them away from the Northeast
Yep. And
quite a bit,
that's a big if. It's a big if. There's still a case pending with the DOJ against the merger that will go to
right?
court in October. So big if.
Right. So they're got their they've got their fingers crossed on that. Now it doesn't really do anything to mitigate their exposure to Florida. Florida seems to be okay. I don't think that's really their biggest problem. Their transatlantic stuff they said was very good, but it's still small. It's only a couple routes,
I
and
did
we
the
know
numbers,
that.
and it's 3% of their third quarter capacity is in transatlantic. So,
So almost
um,
trivial.
yeah,
Yeah. So they, I think,
yes,
I think
yes.
it's doing well, but not having a huge impact. Uh, they didn't really talk about Transcon other than they said the Mint sort of first class product, which that is kind of a high level premium product that they deploy on a lot of their Transcon routes. That's doing well. Again, not too much of a surprise because we know that premium leisure is a very hot market right now. So that's doing well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think Caribbean Florida is okay. I mean, first quarter tends to be more peak season than second quarter for those markets, but no problems there. Um, I think it's just a couple things. I think it's some of those short haul business markets in the Northeast,
Which they
where
highlighted. They highlighted that
yeah,
the slower recovery in New York, coupled with fewer people flying short haul, is makes some of those their weakest markets.
yep, and New York in general, I think is just weak, and part of it is just all these. There's probably people reluctant to fly because of how operational and messy things are, and then combined with the fact that New York has been slower to recover just overall in terms of whether it be business travel or whatnot from the pandemic. So New York is definitely an issue for them right now. They said, well, that's because that's going to recover. That's maybe slower to recover. When it does recover, that'll be upside for us, and we'll see. But it's not a JetBlue's definitely it's been a chronic underperformer for many years now, and it hasn't really done anything convincing to suggest that's going to change. Does the Spirit merger kind of create a new paradigm? They hope so, and we'll see if it goes through. But as of now, it's not a. Now I think it's very important to kind of step back and be clear that the whole U.S. airline industry is structured now where everybody is making money. I mean, Hawaiian is a bit of an exception, but it's probably the lone exception. But let's be clear that JetBlue still made a 10% operating margin. I mean, if this was 2005 or 2006, that would be a huge accomplishment. Right now that sounds disappointing because of what everyone else is making. So JetBlue is making money. It's not going to go bankrupt. It's not losing money, but definitely underperforming its peers.
Absolutely, and that
Yeah.
underperformance looks like it might last through at least the end of the year. I mean, like you said, could last much longer. But the hits that they were talking about in their call this week really look at the second half of 2023, and they have some optimism for 2024. But it's hard to say what's going to happen in 2024. We'll have to see how the demand environment shapes up and everything works out for that.
Yeah. And
With
by
that,
the
Jay,
way,
let's take
they
a. Oh yeah,
oh I sorry, I always get those last minute interjections there. Sorry. But just wanted to say that 10% margin they did in Q2, that was actually worse than they did in Q2 of 2019. They did a 12% operating margin. Now that's not totally uncharacteristic. Southwest, for example, was worse this year than in 2019. Frontier was worse this year. But Southwest, but sorry, but Alaska was better. Delta United and American were better. So yeah, just keep that in mind. JetBlue has regressed since the pandemic.
Well, yeah, we'll see. We'll see. With that, we'll take a quick break and we'll be back to talk about Europe. Hey Jay, we're jumping over the pond and we're going to talk about IAG and Air France-KLM. Why don't you take the lead with Air France-KLM? You covered them during their earnings last week.
Okay, I'm going to throw a lot of numbers at everybody, so please be ready here. Okay, so let's do Air France KLM first. So operating margin, 10%, just like JetBlue. So not doesn't blow anybody away there. Now let's break that down though. Air France itself did a little bit higher than 10%. KLM did 8%. And then Transavia, which is a pretty sizable low-cost carrier, they have a French arm, they have a Dutch arm, that broke even. It's a little disappointing there. Okay, but bottom line, the whole company did 10%. Now let's go to IAG. IAG 16%. So IAG a lot more is a much more profitable company than Air France KLM. And that's
Yes.
nothing new. That's we could have been talking about that 10 years ago. It's been like that for many years now. And if I break that down, British Airways actually underperformed. Their operating margin was only 13%. They actually regressed from 2019. Now,
Yep.
the real superstars were Iberia and Vueling. The Spanish market is doing extremely well for two reasons. One, Spanish leisure markets, just fantastic. And then also South American markets, very, very strong. Spain to South America right now. So Iberia, 17% margin, Vueling, 18% margin. And then finally, Aer Lingus up in Ireland, they did fantastically well at 18%. Again, no surprise because Transatlantic is just, gangbusters
Gangbusters.
as we've heard from so many calls now. So yeah, there are your numbers.
So, the numbers are good out of both airlines. There's still some things going on, some restructuring, but one thing that jumped out at me was they're not seeing any of the yield declines that we're seeing in the US. And IAG broke out their numbers by region. So we could see just Europe, take out all the international, because like you said, Transatlantic's gangbusters. And actually, European yields were their strongest in the second quarter across the group, rising, let's see, in Europe, 18%, and domestic markets, that would include domestic Spain, 19%. And I thought that was really fascinating that yields are still going up in Europe, even whereas in domestic US it's not. It's really shows. I mean, you could argue Europe's a year, 6 months, a year behind the US in the recovery, but travel demand is robust and it's not letting up, at least not at this point.
Right. So remember that Americans this summer are traveling to Europe more than ever. In fact, many Americans are saying, "Okay, this year is going to be my European trip. I'll do domestic another time." Now, in Europe, Europeans is different. Europeans are not necessarily going to the US in much, much larger numbers. And the reason why is mostly exchange rates, I think. The
Yeah.
dollar has been very strong. So
Yep.
Europeans are still uh, having normal travel patterns in terms of, going to visit Spain, someone from London going to visit from Spain, someone from Germany going to visit Greece, whatever. Something. So I think there's a lot. So I think that's one reason why the short haul has not seen the yield declines within Europe, as you mentioned. Now, for these airlines, they don't really care if it's Europeans or Americans sitting on their planes because the fact of the matter is, Transatlantic for both of these carriers, IAG and Air France KLM, were the superstar performers, and that's the reason why they did all relatively well. I mean, Air France, we mentioned, a little bit disappointing, but Transatlantic, and they love when, as particularly Air France KLM, because its network is just kind of spread out all over the globe more so than IAG. They love it when the transatlantic, North Atlantic and South Atlantic do well because it's less competitive. When they go east, Air France has a lot of exposure to Asia, for example, East Africa, parts of even, I mean, just all of Asia. And that starts to get very yield competitive because you're competing against Turkish Airlines on many itineraries. You're competing against the Gulf carriers. So they love it when demand is like really strong on the North Atlantic, and Air France and KLM can team up with Delta and price together, and they just surely made a huge amount of money on those transatlantic routes this summer, as did Delta, United American. We know that from their call as well. Now, the one thing that's interesting about Air France, KLM, and IAG, in addition, is that they were very clear that South America, the South Atlantic stuff, Brazil to Europe, Argentina to Europe, that stuff is doing very, very well right now as well. And that's helping the
Yes.
Spanish markets in particular.
Absolutely. And that South Atlantic strength is one reason why we're seeing so many European airlines look south. Lufthansa has talked about it in their takeover of ITA Airways in Italy, which we'll learn more about this week. Air France-KLM keeps talking about TAP Air Portugal, though still waiting for the government there to decide on the privatization. And of course, IAG is pushing forward with their takeover Air Europa, which would strengthen their position across the South Atlantic and would also expand the Madrid hub. So, they're definitely investing and growing in that region, all three groups, rather than East, like you say, which is just far more competitive. There's just so many more competitors flying between Europe and India and Asia and the Gulf and everything. So, yeah.
Yes, yeah. I wanted to add one more thing about Air France KLM is that their balance sheet is real messy right now. And balance sheet is simply, again, I know there's some people on this call who may be new to the industry or new to finance, but it's just simply their assets and their liabilities, what they owe, what they own. And it's actually in negative territory. Their liabilities are greater than their assets right now, which is not a good situation to be in. So they're doing a couple of different interesting things to raise money. One of the things there's actually they're doing a frequent flyer transaction where they're going to create kind of a new company for their Flying Blue program, just like IAG has the same sort of setup with Avios, and then they're going to raise money that way by selling some bonds through that and whatever, get some private equity investors involved, and that's a big priority. They need to get their balance sheet sort of back in order, especially if they want to buy TAP Air Portugal, which they continue to express interest in.
Yes.
And and the good thing, of course, is their operations, they're generating cash because they're making money now. So that's going to eventually get their balance sheet back in order, hopefully, as well.
Yes.
So,
No, the loyalty deal is interesting because then, and you noted this in your coverage, Jay, was they're raising capital, bringing in Apollo Global Management, but they said the deals would give them they would retain full control over the Flying Blue program, and we've noted in the past that when airlines relinquish control of their loyalty programs, it tends to backfire. Like Air Canada, they went and formed a new loyalty program because they lost control of Aeroplan, then they finally bought Aeroplan back. So
and who was the president of Air Canada when they did that deal? It was Ben Smith, who's now the CEO of Air France-KLM. So he knows all too well the risks in doing these, divesting of frequent flyer programs. So I think they structure it in a way where they're still going to, retain all the benefits. And
this is yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
So but that'll be one to watch. So yeah, it's an interesting time. We're going to hear from Lufthansa later this week. We're going to hear from Spirit. So there's more earnings to come.
More fun to come.
Oh, yes. Well, Jay, always a pleasure. Listeners, if you want to reach myself, you can reach me at er@skift.com. You can reach Jay at js@skift.com. Jay, have a good one.
Okay, you too, Ned, and thanks everyone for listening.
Thank you for joining us for this week's episode of the Airline Weekly Lounge podcast. Check out airlineweekly.com for a new issue every Monday and updates on the latest airline news throughout the week.